Hey everybody. So a fellow I worked with for lots of years at Desh knows reasonably well always says, the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. And so when we're finished here, it should be clear what's the most important thing for us. And if it's not, then we've done a really bad job. So let me take you on a bit of a journey. I just have to push one of these things. There we go. For those of you that here from Newfoundland and Labrador certainly know who Dr. Leslie Harris was. The man is lost to us, unfortunately. He passed away, but he was the president of Memorial. He was one of the best academics that our province produced. And he was from Placentia Bay. Fogo Island is outside of Notre Dame Bay, but nonetheless, we think he knows something about the outports. So here we are on Fogo Island. I'll say it up front. For me, the most important thing is place and the power that place has in the formation of human identity and well-being. And I think if we let go of place, we're going to sink. So this is the place that we're working. This is the place I grew up. And so it's a place with 10 different little communities that up until the early 70s, these people didn't know each other. And so and I'm going to talk a little bit about that because I think there's a lot to learn on Fogo Island from looking backwards at how the people who came before us did social innovation. And so you can see that we're that little red dot there. So we're off the northeast coast of Newfoundland. I like to think about it as being far away from far away. The island, this Change Islands that you see here, we're joined at the ferry, that island has now fallen below 200 people. So, you know, it's definitely an endangered community, and there comes a point that can you come back? So Fogo Island, we still have 2,395 people, down from a peak of 6,000 in the early 60s. And those of you who are not from Newfoundland probably don't know that Newfoundland joined Canada only in 1949. I'm a big fan of this man's writing. If you haven't read Tim Robinson, write down his name. Anyway, he wrote mostly about Connemara and Arran, but I love this quote from him, which talks about islands. I mean, he's obviously preoccupied with islands, but the idea of a comprehensible totality, and that's something that islands offers, and it's a very exciting concept. And you know, as you think about models, and Diane will talk more about models, I think, at the end. Islands are great places to try and do some things because you can see very directly the results of your work. So, you know, there's something called the Flat Earth Society, and it's decided, of course, if it's flat, it has 4 corners, and Fogo Island is one of those 4. That's another really interesting idea to play with. So here we go. First settled in the 1680s. My family came in the 1700s. And certainly a testament to outport tenacity. I left in 1975. We got running water, well, we didn't really we got a hose in 1973. We only got water and sewage about 10 years ago. And we got electricity in 73 around the same time. Fogo Island is a hotbed of cooperative activity. And that's what I think makes our project well placed in that community. We still have a fishery. This is really important. It's a very dangerous thing to be talking about the fishery because you end up in a lot of issues that you might not have intended to get into. But I want to say this. If we don't have a fishery on Fogo Island, everything that we're doing as a foundation is a waste of time and money. Because the fishery is essential to our culture. It's essential to our community. It's necessary, but not sufficient. And so what we're trying to do is to build another leg to live beside the fishery. And so many communities, and I'm in New Brunswick, and I'm sure people in New Brunswick have gone through this same thing, have lost their fishery. I think that's happened because of a failure of business, not a failure on the part of the fish. We'll have to have another gathering and talk about the fishery. So anyway, Fogo Island has a very long history of social innovation and adaptation. You don't survive on a bald rock on an island off an island in the North Atlantic without figuring out a few things. So I always say if we're only half as smart as the people who came before us, we're doing okay. So you'll see the timeline a little later. But we are in a time on Fogo Island, is it the Joni Mitchell song, "You don't know what you've got till it's gone"? We have this generation, this bridge generation, and actually I am one of them. I feel like I was born in a different century than the one that I'm living in. That we know some things from before. I mean, if you think about human knowledge, I think about it this way. There's intellect, and in a digital world, we're very focused on that way of knowing, we're using the intellect. There's intuition. I always tell, I have an 8-year-old nephew who thinks he knows everything, and actually the truth is he actually knows a lot. And I say, Mac, feeling the wind on the back of your neck when it comes out of the northeast tells you a lot of stuff. It tells you stuff with your whole body that reading about the wind on the back of your neck out of the northeast cannot tell you. And to me, that's a way of knowing. That's a source of knowledge that we've got to hold on to. And then, of course, there's instinct, which we all have and works in different degrees. So I think we've talked about all of this. Islands, again, wonderful places to try things, wonderful places to see the good and the bad of modernity. If you want to see the impact of modernity, I mean, it's, you know, you talked about sameness. I haven't been, I just got, first time I've ever been in Fredericton. I'm sure if I go to the outskirts of Fredericton, it probably doesn't look a whole lot different than the outskirts of St. John's. You probably, it's the same multinational businesses and chains and all the rest of it. And so there's more and more and more of that. If you see that on a little island, it's like seeing something that was living die. And so that's like, islands are sort of canaries in the mine for all of us. So a little bit of a tour of Fogo Island, I'll go really quickly. We have 7 seasons that I can describe anyway. June is a season unto itself. And that's a fair-sized codfish. You know, the cod are coming back. That's another business challenge, because the cod are coming back and we're not ready for it to come back. And so the island, I mean, even in my lifetime, we were pretty much self-sustaining for our food. We could grow enough and pick enough and fish enough. You know, the west coast of Canada, some of the inns out there have storm watching season. I always say, well, I'm not too worried about competing with them because it's the Pacific. It's called the Pacific for a reason. A North Atlantic storm is a thing to behold. Now, talk about loss of knowledge. This is an amazing thing. This man's name is Ed Comden. I don't know if you read Lives Lived in the Globe and Mail, but he died on Christmas Day, and he was in Lives Lived. When we started our project, my brother was very preoccupied with the knowledge that's in boats. The knowledge in that boat, to build that boat, came with the early days of the fishery. And we were, my brother used to say, 8 funerals away from never being able to build another wooden boat on Fogo Island. And it sounds kind of cute, right, to say it. And then somebody dies, Ed dies, and you realize what you've lost. So now we're 7 funerals away, except we're really not because of the various things we've done at the school and having young people building boats. But when he went, centuries of knowledge went with him. Skating on wild ice, there's March. March is the most amazing month. Now, Fogo Island is in the Labrador Current, and so this is where, as my friend Pete says, half of Greenland breaks off every year and comes down on top of us. And so the pack ice comes first, and then the icebergs come after that. There's a herd of caribou on the island. We don't know how many, maybe 600 or 700 of them. This is the pack ice. So we said, this is not our ice. This is formed north, and it comes down. And so that's, of course, the seals come with the ice. Oh, there you go. You can tell from this photograph that the wind is in the west, because no one in their right mind would hang out a quilt when the wind was in any other direction. And so this is the punt race, and a race goes from Fogo Island to Change Islands and back. It's the longest seagoing race in the world, and we started the punt race to really find new relevance for these little boats. And it's worked because it's a highly competitive race. Lots of people are building boats, or having boats built for the race. I'd like to export some of these to the Muskokas. You know those fancy cottage country? They must need good, stable boats. We move houses still. A little bit of history because it's important. These people lived on the northeast coast of Newfoundland, the Beothuk. There are no more Beothuk people. Think about how much knowledge we've lost when we lost all of those people. And so this is the thing. the most important thing. Got to hang on to the ways of knowing. I've got to hang on to the knowledge. Mark Kurlansky, who's a New Yorker, wrote a book called Cod. I still think we were slow off the mark. We could have written this book. And this was the tagline of his book, The Humble Fish That Changed the World. I highly recommend reading that book. There are lessons in it for business and ecology that we haven't properly digested yet. So in any event, people came to Newfoundland. I won't go into this too much, but from England and Ireland, mostly from within 5 miles of Waterford and from the southwest coast of England. And so, amazing, these fish. George Rose, the cod scientist, looks at this picture and he cries because he said, actually, that's a big breeder. We should never have been catching those fish. We didn't know. But so these people, and these people, my people, or anybody of the sea, have a way of knowing that comes from this. And this is so amazing. Think about this. So for 400 years, people fished for cod in the outport communities of Newfoundland and Labrador, and I'm sure other parts of Atlantic Canada. Perfectly sustainable fishery. Nobody got particularly rich. And I mean, you could accuse me of being nostalgic for the old days. I'm not really. I remember what it's like to have a toothache and there's no dentist. But nonetheless, this was perfectly sustainable. Inshore fishery, a salt fish trade, very labor intensive. And then this came. So in 1951, the first factory trawler, it took 30 years, only 30 years, to bring the cod to the brink of extinction. That's all. We're really good at that. So this is a really good example of technology not being all that helpful to nature and culture. But it doesn't have to be that way. And so look at these buildings. These are on Little Fogo Island, which are off the coast of Fogo Island. So historical. And are they historical and useless? I don't think so. I think these buildings contain a huge amount of knowledge that can help us find a path. And so you'll see these buildings appear later in my presentation. So in the 60s, when the salt cod trade collapsed, Joey Smallwood was the Premier of Newfoundland. Now, everybody's got a strong opinion about Joey, but no matter what your opinion, if you had been the Premier of Newfoundland then, what would you have done? I mean, you have probably hundreds, maybe 800 rural communities all clinging to rocks around the coast of Newfoundland with no running water, no roads, no health care. What are you going to do? And his answer to it, well, we'll move them all into Gander and Grand Falls. And, you know, and they'll have real jobs. And we need to be really careful about creating jobs. From Fogo Island, not many people went. My uncle went. He became a security guard at the pulp and paper mill in Grand Falls, Windsor, and the job lasted 2 years. And by then he'd given up his house. In any event, we just need to be careful about rushing headfirst into looking for jobs in other places. So anyway, Fogo Islanders stayed, partly because of this man. He was the head of the Extension Service at Memorial University. And he understood that the fundamental problem on Fogo Island at that time was 10 different communities. The merchant pulled out. There was nowhere to sell the fish. There was no way for those people to get together and work together and find a path. So he invited, well, the National Film Board at that time had a huge project on poverty, and it was called Challenge for Change. So he invited the National Film Board to come to Fogo Island, and this man came, Colin Lowe, and he made 27 films on Fogo Island that were absolute catalysts. I remember as a 10-year-old seeing a film, had people in Deep Bay, which is on the other side of the island. And I firmly believed that those people had, you know, 2 or 3 heads or something really different than us. And to see that they were speaking the same language, different dialects, same language, same problems, really catalyzed the islanders to come together. We started a co-op, a fisheries co-op, which is still existing today, and that's why we have a fishery. So this is called the Fogo process. If you Google the Fogo process, I mean, it's still used in communities in the world where there are development challenges where it's believed that the fundamental problem is one of communication. If you study film at McGill, you'll study the Fogo process. In any event, out of that came the Fogo Island Co-op, which still owns the fish plants on Fogo Island. It's why we're still there. Out of that came a small shipyard, which built the longliners for the nearshore fishery. And out of that came a new high school, because prior to that, all the communities had their own little schools, the religions had their own, so we all came together. And I was among that group that went to that high school in the beginning. So to give you a sense of what happened after that, so then we made it through to 1992, and then of course the moratorium. And, you know, that was, I think Rex Murphy called it, you know, it was an economic catastrophe, but a cultural explosion. And he said, Rex said it was an arrow through the heart about Port Newfoundland. And I agree with that, except we're not dead yet. And that's the thing to remember. So now, we still have our co-op and we still have a fishery. It's under a lot of pressure because, well, we don't have the time to talk about the problems in the fishery. But just to give you a sense of population free fall, see Notre Dame Bay? This is only up to around 2,000. We've now dropped to 2,400. So when you're trying to do something, and most of the people, I mean, we have an aging population, the first thing you got to do is try and figure out how to stop the free fall of population, how to get young people to come back. So that's been a big part of our initiative. So in 1976, a book came out called Small is Beautiful, written by Schumacher. I was in second year university, I thought it was the most important book I'd ever read. I still think it's one of the most important books I've ever read. And it got reissued in 2010 with this introduction, which I think is worth reading. It's this idea of a nobler economics. And the good news is we now live in a time where there are a number of economists, for example, Tomas Sedlček or Tim Jackson, who are economists who speak the language of a nobler economics. So I think there is a path. A shore fast is a tether that joins a cod trap to the shore. So it's a metaphor. May we always be shore fast here. So this is, I think all of this you probably got from all the things I've said. Diane touched on this. Nature and culture are the two great garments of life. And business and technology can and should serve these two things. To me, maybe that's what social enterprise is in a way. So this is vision. We want to build another leg on the economy. Obviously, we want to articulate and fortify culture and identity. We think creating international connectedness that is unmediated is a way of doing that. But really, it's about ways of knowing, preserving ways of knowing. In business, we talk about capital a lot. Usually, we mean economic or financial capital. And we forget about all of these other really important forms of capital that we have to work with and that we need to be careful of investing in as we go about our business of investing in financial capital. I don't know if you know this man's work, Peter Senge. I think he's at MIT. I always love this. It's a beautiful, he'll put this up and say, is this the real world? And most people say, yeah, that's pretty much the real world, you know, that society and environment are wholly owned subsidiaries of the economy. And then I said, well, actually, it's not the real world. It's just the way we've allowed the world to become. But the real world, you know, the inherent underlying order of things that's always there, even if we're unaware of it, is more like this. And the challenge that we have as business people is to find ways to develop business models that are consistent with that. Economy is a wonderful servant and not a wonderful master. So it's just a little small change in how we think about it. So Shorefast itself, Diane described, it is a federally registered charity. Nobody wants to be the recipient of charity, and charity is not sustainable. So even Bill Gates' money is going to run out eventually, and mine will run out long before his. So you know, we need to get business working for us. And so I think, you know, whether you think about it as entrepreneurial philanthropy or whether you think about it as progressive capitalism, you end up in the same place. And it's business-minded ways of achieving social ends. These are the projects, as Diane said, preservation projects, the arts. I am convinced that artistic processes and art is a way of knowing from original sources. It's not part of the mush of stuff that we pass around. Knowing things from nature is from an original source. Knowing things through artistic processes from an original source. We need to be mindful to include that in the ways we find our way forward and in our conversations. Business fun and the inn. Okay, and so I'm sure you've probably seen pictures of these studios. These are workspaces for artists. In addition to artists coming to the island, I'll give you a little example of something. We have started what we call the Fogo Island Dialogues, which are arts-led conversations. So there's one happening in Vienna soon. And the way that dialogue is evolving, it's done in conjunction with the Kunsthalle in Vienna. It's going to be a conversation, an arts-led conversation about welfare. Now that's a room you want to be in, because that's going to be a whole different take on how to tackle that problem. And actually the problem isn't welfare, is it? Welfare is just a symptom of a problem. There was a guy in Fogo Island who said to me, you know, to all this controversy about fishermen and seasonal work and all of that, and he simply said, I get 49 cents a pound for my cod fish. He said, well, I mean, I can't fish all winter. I can go work somewhere else. He said, but if I got a better price for my codfish, I wouldn't need EI. And if they sell it in Toronto for $15 or $20 a pound, I don't need to get all of it, but couldn't I get a little more than 49 cents? So, of course, that tells you there's a logistics or a distribution problem that we need to dig into, instead of, you know, telling the man that he's a lazy whatever for not working harder. No, yeah, we won't go there. Okay. So, but we have studios. So let's let people who know more about art than I do talk about why it's important. But it's a really important part of society and well-being. It's a way of knowing. Maybe we'll leave it at that in the interest of time. And more studios. This was the first studio we built, actually. Now, Todd Saunders is the architect. He's a Newfoundlander. And that little old building I showed you at the beginning, he studied it very carefully. I mean, to me, these are of now, they're contemporary, but they are absolutely 100% derived from what was. Now, speaking of contemporary and old, if life is anything, right, it's this always in this rhythm of opposites. And so when we thought about the things we're going to build, we didn't want to set out and copy things that were built in 1850 in Outport, Newfoundland. Because to me, that would just say, what have we learned? We have nothing to contribute other than to copy what came before. To me, that would be kind of admitting we're a dead culture. At the same time, we have to save every scrap of the vernacular architecture that we can. A lot has been lost. Not all of it's been lost, because there's knowledge in this too. This is a very old house that an artist lives in now. So we've tried to, it's both, it's the ands. Now in the inn, and I'll go through this fairly quickly, I'm sure if anybody has any background in tourism, you know it's a dance with the devil at the best times. And so you need to be really mindful of how you do that dance. I think the most important thing is scale. If the scale's wrong, it's not going to work. I think the last point is really important. It's only possible in a diversified economy. If all you have is tourism, I don't think tourism is going to fortify your culture. I think it's going to be more on balance destructive. This is a branch of tourism that I think, this man I think is a great leader in it, and we have a lot to learn from people like him. So I always love this photograph, because I mean, this is a charity, Shorefast, building an inn. Right? There's something about that I think is beautiful. So back to architecture. So this is a very old house on Fogo Island. That's the Long Studio. And so that's what architecture has to do. It has to help place us. And it has to give you a sense of where the cultures come from, and it has to offer a path. And the funny thing about this is sometimes on the island people will say, what are those studios? They must have come from outer space. And then other people will say, Todd Saunders didn't invent anything, he just copied what was here. And so when I hear that, I think, good, we found that place, you know, that's in the middle there. And so you see it here. The inn is under construction here. This is old, over on the right. And these other three big buildings here, taking away the little ones, those are the Fisherman's Hall and the Orange Lodge, really important, and the Anglican Church that is no longer in use, really important heritage buildings. This is where you see the ands. We're restoring these three buildings, and so they give meaning to this new inn, and it gives meaning to them. And so this is another really nice example of seeing time in buildings. To go back to that one for a minute. See, the inn is kind of a cross. You can't really appreciate it. And it's kind of, it too is a metaphor for intersections of old and new, and it's a private spaces and public spaces. And here it is this is Little Fogo Islands in the background. This is kind of the sacred homeland for Fogo Islanders, because that's where we went to fish. This is the inn last week. So it's, Diane's opening in May. We're almost there. And so it has a job to do. And the job is it has to tell the story of the lived experience on Fogo Island. And it has, this is the thing I think, as modern people, we have to hold on to the power of the specific, because there's knowledge and joy in the specific. And so all the things it has 29 rooms. It has a contemporary art gallery, of course. And the library, which specializes in the northeast coast of Newfoundland, is named for Dr. Harris. has a small conference facility, and in partnership with the National Film Board, building on that past with them, the e-cinema is in that building as well. We've done everything we know to do on Earth to do the right things by the ecology of the area. It's not easy to do it, but I think we've done some good things. Well, this is the important part, right? It's owned by Shorefast, the inn, but it belongs to the community. So, God willing, there will be lots of surpluses, and they belong to the community. And it's not a resort, it's a public place, a place for local people and people from way to come together, obviously with private spaces. But it's a part of, yeah. This was another Rex Murphy thing. He said, if Outport Newfoundland is going to survive, it has to get really good at finding new ways with old things. And I think this is kind of a new way with old things. I mean, Outport Newfoundlanders are, maybe all rural people it applies to. They're genetically predisposed to hospitality. So it's not really a big leap to think we should have a lovely inn. Made of wood is made of wood from Newfoundland, Newfoundland spruce, which we have lots of since all the paper mills closed. And so in every move, in every gesture in that building, we have tried to put our culture into it. We've tried to put the specifics of our local community into it. So it is intensely local, and this is true about the food. These are partridge berries. This is the best berry on earth. Everybody thinks it's the bake apple. That just looks like a rock star. This is the rock star. We grow a lot. When I left home in 1975, we were producing about 70% of all the vegetables we needed. Now, we weren't eating arugula, but never mind, we were feeding ourselves. And then we kind of lost our way, and we found our way back. In fact, this fellow, that greenhouse was the first application under the business fund, because he wanted to extend his season. And he does grow arugula now. Food pictures. And there's a cod potting program on the go now in Newfoundland that I think is really important. It's a new way of fishing cod that I think will become more important as they come back. That's our chef, Murray. Partridge berries. Library, I'll give you, this is Dr. Harris. So, you know, as the inn comes to life, it's amazing. That was the original drawing or concept for the library. And we took this picture last week. It's kind of weird to see it all come together. I don't have one of the cinema though. And it has a small conference center. There's the lobby. There's the lobby coming to life. And now this is where it gets interesting. I got to watch time. Okay. Imagine you're going to make this building. And then you have this moment of thinking, so what are we going to put in it for furniture? And you realize, I mean, when we realized this actually quite late in the project, you can't go to Italy and buy a chandelier and hang it up in the inn on Fogo Island. So by the time we realized that, we were already pregnant and well down the path. And so we realized we have to do this ourselves. We have a long history of boat building and furniture making in Newfoundland. But you can't take a chair from 1850. It doesn't work for our modern bums, and put it into a contemporary inn. And so we decided we got to look for the end. So we invited a whole bunch of designers to come from away, who are professional designers, to work in collaborations with the craftspeople and the boat builders and the textile people on the island to develop everything that's made on the island. Some of it is made on the mainland of Newfoundland by a great craftsman on the Bonavista Peninsula, but otherwise is made on the island, including the chandeliers. So this is the hardest. I think that's harder than anything we've done. So this man, Walter Peddle, published a couple of books on Outport furniture. He has been a gift from above to our project, because he's been our guide to say, where is the Newfoundland in that thing? I mean, he corrected the copy books from all of the designers. So there they are, at least not all of them, but some of them. Todd Saunders is from that side. He's the third guy at the back, the architect. We gave them this poem before they started work. And so it was about bring your expertise, bring what you know, but be a servant of the place, which of course is from the 60s. This is what Colin Lowe said. I realized I have to be a servant of the place. This woman is apparently the police chief on Svalbard. So then they got to work, and this is how they worked. This lady is from Montreal on the far side. She designed that chair, built by not that man, but other boat builders. lots of textile work, is a man on Change Islands who says, any man can build a house, but not any man can build a boat. And if you can build a boat, you can build anything. And so we counted on that, and it kind of worked. He's a great boat builder, great rower. Every time he's rowed in a race, he wins. And so he's made, like, one of the things he's made is a chair designed by a Scottish woman named Donna Wilson. It's not finished there. I could talk about this chair for another hour, because the thing about this is we don't expect enough from a chair. You know, the chairs we're sitting on shouldn't be anonymous. We should know where it came from, we should know who made it, and then it has meaning. And we should know where the money went that we spent when we bought the chair. I'm counting on the fact that a lot of people think the same thing. Because this chair, designed by Elaine Fortin, made by Dom Wells, can do a lot if we ask it. Yeah, what's that chair worth? And can we figure out a way to sell it? There's a business challenge. Quilts, we have a long history with quilts. How a 29-room needs 250 quilts is another whole topic of conversation, but has just a little bit to do with the seasons. And so this is just some images of the way it'll be. Rooms have wood-burning stoves. This gives you a little sense of it. Even the wallpaper was designed for the inn on the island. So that's the end of that. I'm almost finished. All of these organizations are really essential to the well-being of Fogo Island. And I mean, we amalgamated as one town a few years ago, so that's really big news. The Fogo Island Co-op, I mean, you know, co-ops, I mean, I really believe in the co-op model. It's kind of an organized way to fight. But the good thing about that is, you know, we're fighting with each other. That's good. You know, we're not hove off on the couch on Fogo Island waiting for someone in Florida to make a decision about whether to close a fish plant. So, I mean, it's about co-ops are ways of keeping some kind of self-determination in a reasonable business model in a community. And I think the structure that Diane described that we have, which looks a bit convoluted, is essentially the same thing. It's another path for communities to own economic assets. Yes, and even the growers have organized themselves into a co-op. And so this is, I think, where we're at. These are the challenges. For some reason, it wants to go ahead. The critical state of the fishery, as I said, that's 10 other conversations. Execution is a challenge, and not a small one. Yeah, it's about rural places, local economy, social enterprise, and community capital. I could have said all that at the beginning and saved the last hour. But I think that's the end of my bit, Diane. Oh, one more poem, and then you're going to wrap up. And we'll be within time. E.J. Pratt was a great poet from Newfoundland. And I think this is the definition of hospitality, of doors held ajar in storms. And I think we are actually in a storm now, a storm of modernity that we are trying to find our way through.